So, hello, everybody. Of course, and for those of you new here, this is Nonprofit Comments, and we hold these meetings weekly. So, today's feature presentation is the SL and the Cultures of Climate Change, and that's a workshop with Tom Boellstorff, who's here beside me, and I will put that in chat. And Tom is professor at the Department of Anthropology, and you get that, at the University of California, Irvine. Big fan of that university. And then also putting into chat the fact that Tom is an author of many articles and books. There's some of them listed there. Of course, the one that many of you might be familiar with was The Coming of Age and Second Life, an anthropologist explores the virtually human. And then, yes, I'm sure many of you have read it. And then also Ethnography in Virtual Worlds, a handbook of methods. And how a video game system battled Atari and almost bankrupted Barbie. And he's the co-editor of Data, Now Bigger and Better. So with that, please welcome Tom. And Tom, whenever you're ready, you can start talking. And then just let me know as you need me to do the slides.
Absolutely. Is my mic level okay? Is it too loud, too soft?
You seem fine.
Okay. I can always try to tweak it if need be. But thank you so much for that kind introduction and having me here, and how wonderful to see so many friends from years past and new friends and old friends in the audience. So this is always a fun thing to do, hayride. And forgive me, I was on a family vacation and I got back less than 48 hours ago, so I'm dealing with like jet lag and family vacation recoveries as well. And so there you see my little title slide, and I apologize, I don't have this in text as well, and we aren't doing it through YouTube. And so thank you so much for Rhiannon and anyone giving some text summaries. I'll try to throw in things too if I can. You can go ahead and move to the next slide. So if those of you who were here with me at the Virtual World Education Consortium about 3 or 4 weeks ago, this is basically the same talk because it's more of a workshop than a talk. I just changed a couple slides. But basically what I want to do is get help, crowdsource with my amazing friends and experts, people like you here in the room, because I'm, getting started this project about virtual worlds and climate change, but now obviously at the same time, we're all just reeling and dealing reeling and dealing with, Trump and what Trump is doing to universities, and including to my university. Oh, my voice is distorted. Let me see if I can.
Your mic level's probably a little hot, so maybe just turn down a little.
How's that?
Better, much better.
Is that better? Okay. Yeah, I've turned it. I can turn it down even more if I need to.
I think it's good.
Trouble connecting to Second Life for some reason. Okay, there we are. But anyway, we are, we're all dealing with what's going on with the Trump administration, and obviously with climate change, the attacks on science, the attacks on funding for science. My students, their ability to do research is under threat because of what's happening to the National Science Foundation. And so I'm sort of in an uncertain moment, like we all are, and so I'm really interested in workshopping and getting ideas from you all, and so basically as many of you know, I've been in Second Life for 21 years now. I've known Nonprofit Commons since the very early days, and many of you I have known and worked with and co-authored with in the case of Gentle and maybe other people here over the years. Um, and what I want to do is use my knowledge and other people's knowledge about virtual worlds as what we can contribute to the climate change battle. What can virtual worlds do around climate change that's different than AI by itself, or websites, or TikTok, or whatever? What can making place, virtual worlds do around climate change is sort of what I'm beginning with. And that might include education, advocacy, building possible futures. And as some of you know, I just finished teaching a class about climate change, and I can give people the syllabus. I gave it to the Education Consortium, so it's in World here already somewhere. And I'm really invested in a perspective or a action research method of hope, and thinking about what sometimes is called practical utopias, because for my students and for many of us, the sense of hopelessness and powerlessness and frustration, anger, anxiety is immense. And that's justified and understandable, and it has its uses, but it also has its limits. And I'm interested in what thinking about better possibilities, futures can do. And more, that is also now including responding to these attacks on climate change and climate science. So you can go to the next slide. For this research, I'm sort of starting with Second Life because I know it best, but I'm interested in Roblox and WolfGrid, and maybe looking at different kinds of virtual worlds, Minecraft, whatever, what they can sort of bring to the table. But just for the moment, let's just only talk about Second Life to keep it simpler. Sort of a research question I'm beginning with is, how is Second Life being used with regard to climate change? And Namara is here, and Utopia, like there's amazing groups that do in various degrees work around climate change and science more broadly. Many of you are here in the room. And that includes education, advocacy, imagining possible futures, even forging places of community and refuge for people affected by climate change. What is possible, and what do virtual worlds, once again, bring to the table in in some ways, one of the defining issues of our time, obviously, climate change, that touches on so many aspects of our lives. And teaching this class, I really came, and reading and learning from you all and other people as well, the amazing paradox that in some ways climate change is the simplest thing in the world. It's you put the gases in the air and the world heats up. But it's also the most complicated thing, obviously, because the effects of different gases on the climate, and climate is incredibly complicated, the politics, the economics. And so it's a very simple, but also obviously a really incredibly complex and interesting and difficult issue. And for me as an anthropologist, I'm interested in ways of thinking, right, and everyday practices and how those are shaping these things. So you can go to the next slide. The second starting point is, how can the impact of Second Life on climate be reduced? And as I mentioned at the Education Consortium talk, there are surprisingly few people doing research on this. Ben Abraham is one of the top people studying this with regards to online games and virtual worlds. What is the carbon footprint of Second Life and of each avatar? And what's the effective draw distance or the number of prims? Are there ways to reduce the climate impact of Second Life? I mean, our meeting here right now is way less of a climate impact than if we tried to meet in the physical world, but there still is a carbon footprint. And one reason this is a huge challenge is because most of the metaverse is corporate owned, and corporations don't want to reveal anything about the sort of underlying software and servers, so it's really hard to access this information. And another reason why this is a really complicated question is because we're all using different computers, different internet connections. There's a lot of variables involved, right? And people who study these things are used to that, because if you study the emissions of automobiles, you also run into a lot of those complexities. But it would really be interesting to learn more about this and then do some experiments in ways to reduce Second Life's climate impact. If we did the great little, 2D, avatars, I'm sure some of you have, seen them. What would be the impact, of that, right? What would that, um, do if we had, a different kind of look. Let's see if I can do it right now. Here I am. I'm sure you all have seen these. What if I was a paper doll, right? This is a lot less prims. I think I look pretty fetching. I've got a jacket on, not your regular professor, but like, what's the climate impact of this, right? Of this avatar I have right now compared to the one that I was just wearing? We don't know really. And it would be interesting to learn more about that. Exactly. Here I am as my paper avatar. You can go to the next slide. And then the third starting point, and this is sort of that utopia, that hope where so many of you are doing such creative work as well. How can virtual worlds and Second Life as an example reduce climate change, mitigate climate change? We cannot let COVID and the pandemic determine the horizon of our thinking, the limits of our thinking. That was a very kind of, emergency situation where we were improvising, people weren't traveling, and the impact of that is still really complicated. So post-pandemic, how can we think about the role of virtual worlds in reducing climate change in ways that are different than Zoom, in ways that are different than email, but are part of it? In my title before, when I talked about metaverse, obviously virtual worlds are part of a bigger online ecosystem, right? That is everything from Discord and email to online games and so on and so on. And so we have to think about those interconnections. But if you go to the next slide, for me, the heart of what I'm interested in is place. What is the role of online place? This is just a snapshot from one of the AI town hall. But us right now, it's so easy for us to take it for granted. Most of us have a lot of experience in Second Life and virtual worlds, but the incredible transformation in the human journey that we can make new place, that we aren't limited to the planet Earth in a second. I don't mean to get silly, but it really is significant, I think. There's some geographers in the room, right? When we can make these new geographies, what are the dangers, the potentials, the incredible potential? And climate change is about place, right? At the end of the day. And what can creating online place do? What's the role of culture and ways of thinking in that? Because that's how we are creating these places. That's sort of a place that I am beginning with and what I'm thinking about. And so you can move to the next slide. As I mentioned, I want to start with what I know, which is Second Life, and I know some other virtual worlds, and that will mean more collaboration as we add more virtual worlds. Gentle and a few of us have been working in doing a little bit of stuff in WolfGrid, and there's amazing work happening in Kitely. The online everything is so corporate owned, so controlled by the oligarchy, much more than 20, 30 years ago, when it was more dominated by universities and the military, frankly, and government. It's really important, I think, to imagine virtual worlds outside of corporate interests. And that's why a group like NPC is incredibly important, because even though the nonprofit metaverse space is small, especially if you're talking about ownership, it adds up. There's a lot of amazing experimentation and work happening out there. And that's why I'm really interested in the nonprofit metaverse and what its potential might be. You can go to the next slide. I've just got two more because, like I said, I kept this short. Um, so as an anthropologist, I hang out with people. We do participant observation, interviews, focus groups, and I've already started doing that around this project. But of course, with virtual worlds, there's also these incredible possibilities to create things, design ethnography. Those of you who participated with Donna and I in the disability project that we did a few years ago, where we had Ethnographia Island, and we had folks building and commenting on what they built and sharing what they built. That's a method that you don't normally do in anthropology, or I think any other discipline, but it's something that is made possible by virtual worlds. And placemaking and building place as a way to imagine futures is something that I'm very interested in. And then the last slide, which is the slide that I'm always talking about, I keep joking it will be engraved on my gravestone. The reason why the stakes are so high, and especially right now, is because I am amazed, shocked, disappointed that in 2025, there are still people who say that the online is not real. And when we look at the role of online technologies in the rise of populism and of Trump and other authoritarian figures, it's particularly shocking to me that that is still around when it is empirically clear that go back one, stay on there just a moment, that if I study Italian here in Second Life, I can go to Italy and talk to people. If I make a friend here, that's real. Not everything is real. And this four-way grid that I created several years ago in an article is just to talk about how things online can be real or not real. That's box C and D, depending on your definition of real. But it's not guaranteed. You don't know ahead of time. And that's really important for thinking about misinformation, for thinking about climate change. And on the other side, just because something is physical does not mean it's real. That's the danger of, taking IRL at face value, right? That real life, that physical is real, because from Hollywood to Halloween, there's a lot of stuff in the physical world that is not real. And we certainly see that once again, the impact of that online and offline in the current social and political environment that we are in. And I make this point over and over again because climate change is real and virtual worlds are real. And these online spaces we make can perhaps give us really interesting possibilities for imagining better futures. In fact, we see, many cases, people in this room who have been involved with experiments and imagining futures like that. And so I'm really committed to building this conversation, and particularly with what's going on right now in terms of, higher education. How can this support science? How can this support higher education? I am shocked by how many of my students didn't know the basics about climate change. Most of them had not had any curriculum on it since they were in elementary school, and this is in California. So the role of preserving knowledge when knowledge is disappearing right now, as many of you know, right? Government websites are disappearing, information's being deleted. What can we do is sort of stuff that I hadn't really considered at the beginning when I was thinking about this before the current administration in the United States, but obviously is now something that I'm very passionate about including in this. So thank you so much. And like I said, I'm sorry this is a little scattered, but it really is where I am right now with the shifting ground that we are all on. And I'm really excited and honored and thankful for ideas and and thinking, and I'm gonna talk at Scientia Island, before long, and keep talking about this stuff and doing stuff. And so I'd love to hear, you know, thoughts and ideas, but also please just to stay in touch as I keep, working to move this forward to the best of my ability. So thank you so much. And thanks, Rhiannon, so much for the transcription. I really appreciate it.
So would you like to have a discussion here or pose out questions since we've got like the rest of, like another half an hour? Um, do you want to pose anything or sort any discussion?
I'd rather hear from other folks, um, Marley, you said you just sent me something in email. I'll look at that later, but I'd love to just sort of um, think out loud with you all, and if anyone has any sort of comments or thoughts, inspiration, ideas, I would love to hear it. Thanks, Brock.
Sorry,
And forgive
sorry
me, I
for
wasn't able
saying.
to track all the chat, so if there was something in chat, just repost it.
Have you talked with Linden Labs to find out how much of a carbon footprint increase Second Life has undergone since the time it began? And you were involved when it began, okay? So you would be aware of it. I have heard that things like extra scripts, jewelry we wear, the textures and everything, because of the increase, that's also contributing to the carbon footprint. But what have they told you?
So that's a great question, and Marley, you can use voice. And the question was about talking to Linden Lab, and I haven't, but I plan on it. And so you're inspiring now to just do it, because I know people at Linden um, Lab, and many of us do, and to approach them and see what they would be interested in, doing or talking about with this. So that is something that I'm interested in doing, and also like the mobile version of it, or now the new browser, the Zero project. What's the implication of that, and the role of sort of client side and server side, as you also said, like scripts and all those kinds of things. So I'd love to. I am going to talk to them about that, and I'm also not only to see what they know, but to see if they'd be willing to do some experimenting, right, with us around that. So stay tuned on that, because it is something that I've thought about doing and am planning to talk to them about, and see if they would be interested in doing it, because Second Life is such a robust world. It would be very interesting.
And I do want to add, when you were bringing up the idea, Shiloh, of how you can optimize things. Like you have two sides to this equation, right? There's what's happening at Linden Lab and all its servers, and then what's happening individually at our houses too, because right, we're also part of this impact on the climate. So anything that I think you can do for optimizing even how you're sorting things means you have a lesser load, even if it's not affecting them on the back end. Even if we don't know what's happening on their side exactly with the impact of things, we know on our side things like lowering draw distance. If it's making it easier for your computer to run, that means it's using less processor, running cooler, right? So that is also very helpful regardless of which side. So
And just to add, like, we know that AI is really bad, right? One ChatGPT query uses about half a liter of water. It is overall, and it's increasing. It is just horrible, the amount um, of processing power that is taken up by that. And another point that I am interested in, Rhiannon, is this relationship between like individual user choices and the sort of corporate side of things. Because something I mentioned at the previous talk, just as an example, is that in my state of California, where water is a huge issue, right? 80% of water goes to agriculture. Um, Another like 12, 13% is business and industry. consumer water use is something like 4% of the total. I forget the exact number. It's around 4%. And so the problem is that, there's some great programs in California for people to rip up their lawns and put in native plants or to take shorter showers. And all that's great, but the savings that you're making are only on that 4% slice of the pie, right? So to really make a difference around water in California, you've got to deal with agriculture one way or another, and growing pistachios, for export or whatever, these very thirsty plants that are really not for this climate, that are using 80% of the water in California. And something, and maybe Midori could, be a way into looking at this is what we're doing, like you said, Rhiannon, like, reducing our draw distance, whatever, is that like 4% of the overall, or is it 50%? Do they have any idea on that? Would be very interesting to know. And one reason for that is that for a virtual world like Second Life that has user generated content, there's a lot more client side, user side, so to speak. Whereas if you're doing an online game like an Elden Ring or, whatever kind of thing, most of the textures and sounds and everything is downloaded onto your computer, right? That's why you have those huge downloads for one of those online games. And so it changes that dynamic. Whereas with something like Second Life, you have to download all the textures all the time because people are creating things, right? So that user-generated content has an impact, but what is that impact would be really interesting to understand better.
And of course, Second Life, with it being user generated content, the the level of a game that they're gonna actually make those textures to be as efficient as possible is not happening here with a slew of everybody being able to create. So that all adds to it. I mean, and I know obviously there is this, like you said, there is this impact on both sides, and you're interested in that larger thing too. Um, but no matter what, I am like always a proponent of like whatever you can do, even on that agricultural side of things. And I know Namara obviously has a bunch of stuff in her region too about this. As much as you can be supporting your own local ag, the less that is you know of the larger impacts of traveling your food from across the country to get here, and never mind how it's grown too, right? So, and Marley, you had a question. Did you want to actually bring that up? And then Zinnia has one too. I don't know if you're still here, Marley, if you want to say something in voice.
That's a great question, Zinnia. How do we help people feel good about their impact than um, bad? And there have been a lot of great examples, people who do social marketing, right? That, uh, oh, and Shiloh, we'll talk about that, but about sort of focusing on empowerment and, that sort of, um, that sort of positive side of things. When I taught my climate change class, I spent a whole week talking about the ozone layer as a way to sort of create an example around that, because the Montreal Protocol that bans the CFC chemicals that have damaged the ozone layer is the only United Nations treaty that is signed by every single country in the world. It's the only one. And the ozone hole is healing since we discovered the ozone hole. That treaty is enforced and successful. We don't have disinformation conspiracy people talking about how there really is no ozone hole and we should be using CFCs all the time. We don't have that. And it is this incredible success story. And it was a success story not of individuals choosing not to use CFCs in the refrigeration or hairspray. That was part of it. But it really was about governments banning and enforcing those bans. And it was also about scientists finding alternative chemicals that could, be used as refrigerants. But I actually spent a whole week of my class out of 10 weeks talking about and having them read about the ozone layer, just to get in their minds that this is doable, that communities and nation states can come together. And there was resistance at first back in the 70s when that was happening, and in the 80s, but it worked. And so, climate change in some ways is more complicated than the ozone hole layer, ozone layer stuff, but there's a lot of commonalities. So um, that's one trick that I have tried to use to sort of talk about the idea that um, that kind of large scale change is possible, that brings together individual choices and changing society. Because I absolutely agree with several of you talking about how even if your personal choices and your community choices are on that 4%, it's still a great thing to do for the example it shows and for the impact it has. Because every benefit that we make around climate change, however small, is moving the needle. And setting ourselves up for all or nothing is a disempowering thing, right? Is because then, and that's why sometimes there's been this, I'll put it in chat, this idea of protopia that some thinkers have talked about, because the idea being that utopia, or dystopia, the negative version, but the danger is if it sounds like an unattainable thing, which is what the word utopia means. It means no place. Then you're setting the bar for change so high that people give up, right? It doesn't seem possible. And how is it that small changes can add up, I think, is a way to have that positive, um, to push towards that positive framework.
Marley, I don't know if you can hear, but if you're there, you can ask your question. I think you had one. I think the interesting thing too is there's been quite a few through the ages of Second Life, if that could be a thing, right? Many of us have been here now for, like, I mean, for myself, I know it's been 2 decades, which is pretty crazy to think. But there have been others who've had projects and work that has sort of gone into some of this, you know. I mean, certainly, obviously, we brought up Namara of what she's continuing to do, but there's been others like I know certainly when I worked with Global Kids, they had a lot of overlap in regards to climate and some other things like that. And there's a couple other NPC folks that are often here too that are not here right now, that are in that space as well. So I don't know if there's a like, are you hoping to bring together folks to workshop some of this? Is it just like referring people to you? Like, are you interested in prior content from within Second Life that's on these topics?
Oh, absolutely. I am the why reinvent the wheel? Like learning about that history and building those connections is incredibly useful and important to see what's already happened and what is being built already in Second Life and elsewhere. And it not just like obviously there are the groups like Utopia, but also people who are building environments in Second Life that have a kind of environmental or nature theme are touching on these issues, right? So there's so much activity happening in those spaces, and sort of cataloging that and thinking about what we can build on and working with those communities is obviously something that is really important and useful. And just as a side note, I've played around before with like, um, building a metaverse of hundreds. Like how to, I joke about this, but when I think about challenges that we face in terms of thinking about, um, oh, thank you, Shiloh. Thank you. We'll follow up on that. Challenges that we face. One is the real thing, right? The real, unreal thing. But another one is, I'm sure you all will raise your hands. People who say, oh, I thought Second Life was dead already. Oh, I didn't realize Second Life is still around. And one of the most disempowering aspects of Silicon Valley mentality is this idea that you have to be the next iPhone or go home, that you have to be, millions and millions of people or you're uninteresting and it's a failure. And so much gets missed, right? As an anthropologist, I know that most human interactions happens in small groups of 5, 10, 20 people, right? We aren't always at a Taylor Swift concert. We don't live in gigantic communities of tens of thousands of people. I mean, we live in them, but our interactions, our networks don't work like that, right? And how do we think about the way that smaller groups have big consequences? And that's across the metaverse. If you look at people who use texting and messaging, it's often with small groups. And that's interesting to me because obviously around climate change, you're interested in scalability, right? You're interested in getting as many people involved or responding as possible. But how to think about that in terms of the smaller groups and smaller group interactions is something that is really interesting. And just as a quick plug, Mia Consalvo, I'll get the title in a second. I'll pull it up off my computer. And some of her colleagues just did a book on microblogging. Let me find that and just share it with you. There's something very important about this book. It just came out, and it's worth looking at. It's really great. Here's the name, and I'll get to your question, Shiloh, in just a second. But the interesting thing about Mia Consalvo's book, it's a co-authored book, I'm forgetting the other author, is what she talks about, and her co-author talks about, is that if you look at Twitch, right, and streaming, everyone knows about the kind of Mr. Beast or Aaron Paul, whatever, like the people that have millions and millions of followers. But if you look at the data, most people have 20, 15, 5 people following them. Sometimes people stream to no one or just 1 or 2 people. But that actually adds up to be the majority of what's happening on Twitch. And if you look at that and talk to those people, then you get a much better picture of what streaming really is. Because one thing, for instance, is that when you only look at the big people, you really think about streaming in terms of labor. What are these people doing? Because they're making a lot of money, production values, it's about labor. But when you include the micro bloggers and micro streamers, what Mia Consalvo and her colleagues say is then leisure becomes very important as well, that it's not all about labor. And you miss that if you only look at the big stuff. And my question is, what is the analogy for virtual worlds? What is the analogy? What are we missing? Not us necessarily, obviously, but what are people missing when they are thinking about virtual worlds and they're only thinking about Roblox or Minecraft, and they're only thinking about big things where you get 10,000 people in a virtual world? And isn't this concurrency really exciting that we can do a Taylor Swift concert in a virtual world? And that's wonderful. I'm not saying it's not, but we don't spend most of our lives at a big concert, right? So what is getting missed in virtual worlds on an analogy, right, with that stuff around streaming is something that I would love to think about with regard to climate change. So, oh, and people are sending me all kinds of great stuff. I will try to keep up on this. And then Shiloh, someone just had a question. Darn it, let me see if I can find it.
While you're looking for
Oh,
that, I think Marley also has voice too now.
oh, go ahead, Marlene, and then I can get Shiloh's
Can you
question.
hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yes, I hear you.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm deeply interested in the psychology around climate change and how we can use Second Life to raise awareness about it. Uh, some of you, a few of you here have been involved in past workshops where I've had people look at attitudes they have about climate change, and it actually turns out that if you take a global look at that and look at all these different attitudes, I have a chart that I sent to you, Tom. We contain always some percentage of the attitudes that we say we're against. And sometimes we can't help that because of the way things are constructed. If my daughter feels terrible about taking planes and driving cars and using fossil fuels sometimes, but she has to do that in order to do the good work that she needs to do. And so we get caught in these paradoxes. We have to deal with a government now that wants fossil fuels on the table for profit motives. And we have a kind of an uphill battle in trying to get legislation and legislators who are going to support the changes that we need to make in order to save the planet. But in Second Life, the eco-psychology is really interesting. For one thing, when we create natural environments, they are usually pristine, beautiful, have very few quirky things about them. One of the things that we can show in real time is what would happen over time if actual climate change was impacting the environments that we create here in Second Life. So people can actually feel what's happening with their pristine environments. So the other thing is to get much clearer about our own attitudes and other people's attitudes so that we can have good dialogues with people who are all across the spectrum, both economically and psychologically and geographically and so on, with these issues.
Yeah, those are all great points. And in terms, I heard a comment, someone was saying my voice is a little low. I'm trying to not talk too loud. I turned it up just a bit. So let me know if it's too loud now.
I think you're fine. I think
Okay,
you
good.
risk going more if you go more than this, that it'll break up again.
Okay, good. But when I taught my class, I looked at so much stuff on psychology. I mean, anthropology and psychology are good friends, right? And that is so important. And here are the 3 articles around psychology and climate change that I actually used in my class. I could email people any of them if they want. I have a bunch more. There's so much important work going on in psychology around this, and thinking about the relationship between self and society is, so important. And so I can tell you that these 3 are really good. But there's so much more that is out there, and I have a lot more that I would be happy to share. Things I've found and I've liked. And then, Marley, another important point you made is, yeah, there are some post-apocalyptic kinds of landscapes in Second Life, but often it's more of a pristine nature. There's been a lot of experimentation that way, and that could be something that could be a really interesting project, right? Is to experiment with building different kinds of futures and living in them, right? Because that's something different than if you did it just as an image or a website, is that you can be in it, right? And obviously there's been so much creative work already in those kinds of spaces. And then the third point you made, and then I'll get to Shiloh's question, was that, like I had said before, but how I'm a bit like we all are, struggling with the rapidly changing authoritarian situation we are dealing with, especially being in a university right now. There's nothing like this has ever happened, in my career, where the National Science Foundation has now said they'll basically fund no anthropology. They'll only fund it if it's about AI or biotech, or they have these four priorities. They fired most of the staff. They've cut the budget. It's maybe they'll change their mind tomorrow, right? Because they're very inconsistent. But it's just, how do we do this in this environment, like you said, where they're denying climate change, they're supporting incredibly strongly the fossil fuel industry, and removing support for solar and wind and other kinds of technologies that puts America's competitiveness at risk. Obviously, I mean, the damage is just horrible. At my university, in our Earth System Science department, we had from a colleague I found out, we had a graduate student who just got their PhD in climate modeling, very, very good at that, and got hired by NOAA, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. And then 3 months in, they got fired, right? Because they fired everyone who was a probationary person who had been hired in the last 18 months. And their whole career was built towards this job, and they would be very important in it. And they've been fired for no reason, nothing about their performance or their skills, just because they're dismantling science. And so, wow, I'm, reeling from that. Oh, and stranger, as I'm just looking for, yeah, the Dunbar's number, that kind of thing, about sort of, even with social networks, are the sort of number of people we interact with in an active social way obviously has limits. And then, and Shiloh, you had, I'm very interested in this about, Tom, is there a trade-off by using virtual worlds like Second Life versus driving to a conference? And it absolutely, but as I've been researching it, it's less clear overall. We need better research on this. So for instance, if you have a city, I'm just going to make up a city, Chicago, and there are 50 employees, and instead of going to an office in downtown Chicago and driving there, they are working at home 4 days out of 5. And so they aren't wear and tear on the highway, they aren't driving cars, but they are heating and air conditioning during the day their 50 homes instead of heating one central office, if you see what I'm saying. So what is the impact of all of the individual homes, right, versus being in one building that is heated as a unit, so to speak? The jury's still out, so to speak. Like, we need more science, on this right at the moment when it's getting attacked. So that is a really interesting, issue. I think for conferences, it's likely more clear that there is a big carbon benefit, especially conferences that are international or bringing people in from much greater distances than, people driving around Chicago or whatever, to take my example. So yeah, that's a really interesting area as well, where there needs to be more research. It's an area where I'd love to hear from other people if they find that there's surprisingly little data about that kind of thing, and what work is happening around that obviously is now under even more threat. And so there's this advocacy doing. And yeah, the MIT Media Lab, I mean, so many places are doing great stuff and finding alternative funding. It's, we're going to get through this, but I really wasn't expecting to be dealing with, everything that's going on around funding for science, also the attacks on our international students. It's just, it's been really hard, obviously, for all of us. I'm relatively safe, obviously, but for my students, it's just not only their support, but their future employment is just, no one knows what to say. no one knows what to say right now. It's just really a difficult time. And Farzana, that's a really good point about unfavored topics and getting support to travel. Yeah. Um, the uncertainty is a feature, not a bug, that we just don't understand what will happen and what will stick. Um, so it's a very difficult time, but that needs to be part of the research and part of the advocacy, obviously. That's a great idea, Shiloh. Like, simulation is one thing that virtual worlds can do. It's not the only thing that they do. And often it isn't like an exact simulation, but like social experimentation, that kind of hope utopia kind of thing. Um, but sort of imagining alternative futures is something that you can do with virtual worlds when we have this shared place. That is another really important, interesting possible. And yes, how can we support the grassroots movements? Thank you, Buffy. And like I said, I'm going to keep doing this. Stay in touch. Zinnia, bringing in younger people, I think that is really interesting. And was it Shiloh or Marla? Now I'm losing track. It's also, I'm also interested in older folks. I'm interested in youth, but also elderly and older folks, because my colleague Celia Pierce at Northeastern University, who I wrote that handbook with, she was one of my um, authors, has done and is doing a new project about older video game players and people in virtual worlds, and I'm really interested in that as well. So this effective age cohorts. Oh yes, I've known. I was actually one of Celia's dissertation advisors. So Celia and I go way back. But thinking about younger folks, but also older folks. And Second Life has a big population of people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond. And I think that's really interesting to look at around climate change and that role of elders as well as of young people. And so, Shiloh, that's a great point. And Zinnia, yeah, about younger students. I mean, I just taught a bunch of 18 to 20-year-olds this climate change class, and it was really eye-opening and fascinating to hear about what they're concerned about and the anger and the frustration they feel, but also the powerlessness they feel. I mean, their lives have been shaped so much by COVID, and all they've really known almost is Trump, between Trump and Biden. And now that's like, what, 8 or 9 years. And so that's since they were 10, 11, 12 years old, right? And so they, that Obama is a distant memory. And I'm just speaking about US, but this shows up internationally as well, obviously, this kind of global zeitgeist. They are lived in a world where they feel very frustrated and powerless in some ways. But they're also really creative and exciting, the ideas that they have. And they have a lot of hope, and they care a lot about climate change. And obviously, the students who took my class is self-selecting for that. But, talking to them about their peers, it's not just limited to them. Oh, yes, thank you, Marley. You mentioned that climate change in an aging society. Yeah. So yeah, thinking about that role of age cohorts, virtual worlds are great for thinking about international collaboration, obviously. There's so many things that virtual worlds can um, do in these spaces and are already doing. Um, like people were saying, I don't want to um, reinvent the wheel. It's always building and working with people who are already around. But as many of you know, even for those of us who spend a lot of time in Second Life and virtual worlds, a challenge of virtual worlds can be sort of search doesn't work like it does with Google. And it can be, finding what's out there is a fascinating process that it doesn't just work as well as it does on the web, and what are people actually doing.
And that also pertains to history, right? History, it's sort of more ephemeral than the physical world might be, where there's less history that's been captured over time. So not only like what's searchable in here now, but like outside of those who have experienced it that might still be around, like that knowledge of what has happened beforehand in these spaces and what might be what we're building off of or other good prior examples. I think that's another thing that's hard to find, and that really kind of comes down to the lore of those still here, right? Or the mind, the
That is
memory.
such an important point. And Brian, with the Virtual Worlds Museum and other people that are doing that kind of history, it's a real danger. And as you mentioned in your kind introduction, I just finished a history book about the Intellivision video game system, and oh my God, was that fun. But for technology in general, history is so much in danger of being lost, because the earlier consoles or whatever don't work, different formats. That there's that kind of issue, but also, as I mentioned, the tech industry is so obsessed with the next thing that's coming out. There's very little interest in what happened before because you can't sell it, and so the historical amnesia that can happen is really disempowering. And there's amazing history in Second Life that we can learn from around this, and um, it is a real issue. I mean, there's like the history wiki, or there's other kind of stuff out there, but it's really about the labor of love of people who do it, because once something is deleted, it's not really archived. And how, many of us, as I'm sure have tried to go to some island or some parcel about something that we love, and it's gone, right? And then it's untraceable once it's gone. That is not something that Second Life or most virtual worlds are good at. But the internet more generally, the work of Internet Archive and other organizations is just so important. And as some of you mentioned, not only is it being lost, right, over time, but in terms of the bigger picture, with the current Trump administration, it is being actively deleted. And people are rushing to try and save this data and put it elsewhere. It's not only data rot that people change a system or whatever, but it is actively being erased, the history, which is a hugely disempowering, because climate change is about history. It's about change over time. That's what change means. I know we're up at 10 o'clock, so I just once again thank you all so much for this. And I'm trying to take notes and saving all the text chat. But any of you who've emailed me or chatted me, I check my email constantly. Here it is again. And please stay in touch. And I'm going to keep working on this, and I want to be building community around this and leveraging the amazing community that we have. And I have been a nonprofit commons fan from the beginning, and you all are the best. I mean, you bring together so many people. Talk about building community and saving history. I mean, nonprofit commons is just incredible in that regard, and it is such a treasure and a resource. So thank you all so much.
I have like one final question for you though. Like, are you, as you have in past things, are you going to? I mean, you may not be at that point yet. Is your plan to have like discussion groups and around these things and that sort of stuff, or is it still just like bring you resources at this point and then you're kind of going to work from there?
I definitely want to start scheduling some focus groups and doing interviews, things like that. And actually, one thing that I did way back in my original Second Life research was these digital cultures chats that I would do like every week or two. Some of you are old enough that you might remember a couple of those. And so, doing some of those, alongside this here, but doing some of those is an easy way to build conversation. And so that is something that I'm interested in doing. So stay tuned on that.
That sounds great. And you, of course, you're always welcome. Like, in regards to NPC, I think some of that strength has been the fact that like we're kind of a group of groups, right? In a way that if there's crossover and you want to do any of those at the same, during one of these time sessions that we usually do on a Friday meeting, that you're welcome to kind of come back and do those things too. You know what I mean? We're here for you in that
Thank
regard.
you. Thank you so much. No, that is so awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. And then, yeah, I would say, email out to Tom. Obviously, I mean, climate change as a topic as a whole is obviously very important for all of us and for future generations of everyone. And I think this idea of kind of future prototyping, thinking, brainstorming of all this stuff is and how we might be able to use these spaces or rethink some of these spaces in regards to that are great, um, as a great way to sort of kick things off too. So thank you, Tom, for all of that. And just everyone else reach out to him. So, with that, thank you, Tom. And thanks to everyone else here today. So I will wrap up the regular bit. If you guys have anything else you want to share in chat, feel free to do that. I'll be around for a little bit longer if there are any questions or anyone needs any help. But again, thank you, Tom Boellstorff, and for the great work and thought that you're putting into all of this.